Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. Hopefully, everybody can hear me okay. I'm Rabbi Ben Zeidman from Temple Mount Sinai, and we're glad to have you with us this evening. I'm joined this evening by a couple of people, including Dr. Larry Lesser, obviously, who is our speaker for this evening, as well as by Rabbi Jeff Middleman, who I will turn it over to now.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. And Rabbi Ben Zeidman has been a friend for many, many years. I may have seen actually many of you or some of you because I was there to do the installation for Rabbi Zeidman, which was an incredible joy to be able to be there and to be present with all of you. This is a particularly exciting project. I want to share a little bit. I'm the founding director of an organization called Sinai and Synapses that runs this project called Scientists and Synagogues, of which tonight is a part of. Scientists and Synagogues is a project that aims to be able to elevate the discourse surrounding religion and science and to be able to look at some of the big questions that we're facing in this world where we need wisdom from both Judaism and science and math together here. And so over the last 5 years that this project has run, Scientists and Synagogues has funded 34 communities from all across North America, looking at everything from the science of health to memory to compassion to astrophysics to what would happen if we discover life on other planets, to, as we're getting ready for Pesach, about the science of memory, which I may have even said because my memory is not as good as it used to be. But this is a particularly exciting project because this is the first time we've done anything on mathematics. And it's something very near and dear to my heart because I started college as a math major. So I want to thank you all for being here, for being present. Thank you to Rabbi Zeidman, and thank you to Dr. Lesser, and have to also thank the AAAS, the world's largest scientific organization, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They've been our partners. They work with the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion. They've been our consultants and partners, ensuring that everything that we're doing is in the interest of the best scientific knowledge that we have right now. And the John Templeton Foundation, which has funded work from University of Pennsylvania and Harvard and the Black Hole Initiative and Character Day, and they have funded incredible projects. And this project is one that they are helping support as well. So I'm going to put our website to be able to see more about the work of Sinai and Synapses. If it's okay with everybody, once a week we put out content and programs and all sorts of videos and conversations about the interplay of science and religion. We're going to be putting this up hopefully next week or the week after, so you can be able to join. It's something you can always opt out. But we'll put you in on our list to be able to find out more of these kinds of conversations because these are so crucial. And I'll put our website there as well. But thank you all for joining us, and particularly thank you to Rabbi Zeidman and Dr. Lesser for this wonderful idea and turning this into fruition.
Thank you, Rabbi Middleman. It's great to see you and to have your partnership in this as we all seek to counter that commonly held belief that scientific thought and scientific methodology is counter to religious thought and religious identity. That is not the case, and we hope that over the course of this evening and the several talks that we are holding in partnership with Scientists and Synagogues, that we can do our part in helping to take away some of those thoughts and ideas about the conflict between science and religion, and to bring the two together and to help us to become more full people and lead more meaningful lives. Hence, higher meanings, exploring connections between religion and mathematics. We have a few partners to thank this evening as well. Scientists in Synagogues and the partners there. And that is University of Texas, El Paso. Thank you so much to the Religious Studies program, the Computer Science Department, and the Mathematical Sciences Department here at our local University of Texas, El Paso location. We're grateful to have you. I get the honor of being the rabbi, as well as the moderator, as well as the tech support for this evening. So please know we are recording this session. If you want to go back and look at it or share it with someone, that will be available. Everyone should be muted. We will continue to leave everyone muted, but if you have any questions at any point throughout the conversation as Dr. Lesser is presenting, please feel free to go ahead and type those questions in the chat, and he'll see them if he has a moment to see them. And if not, I'll be able to take those and to present those to him at the end during our question and answer. So you don't have to hold on to your question or worry about remembering it. Just go ahead and throw it in the chat and we'll take note of it. And then at the end, if you're able to stick around to take a brief anonymous survey that would help us as we're thinking about this intersection between mathematics and religion, that'd be really, really wonderful. So just a few words of introduction for Dr. Larry Lesser, and then we'll let him go ahead and get started. Dr. Lesser is a mathematics education professor and a University of Texas El Paso Distinguished Teaching Professor at the University of Texas at El Paso. He has won several awards for his teaching and outreach, and his 115 papers include several on connections between mathematics and Judaism. He is also world-renowned as a musician. So you may know him from that aspect of his life and his career as well. Music, including words and thinking about and reflecting on his Judaism and Jewish identity and Jewish knowledge, as well as there's his album Sparks, as well as mathematics music as well. So we're grateful to have you with us. And Dr. Lesser, thank you so much for helping us to understand the infinite this evening.
Thank you so much, Rabbis Middleman and Zeidman. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey to infinity and beyond. Even a young child thinks about infinity. I mean, like, are the stars infinite in lifespan or number? And this past Sunday was Pi Day, which celebrates a number whose decimal never ends. But sadly, I know that not everyone has been taught math as something beautiful. And the only math religion link some people might have or imagine is wanting prayer in schools when taking a math test. So let me offer some reassurances to anyone who's nervous about math or about religion. First, there'll be no grades. Second, I have worked very carefully to minimize jargon, so it's fine if you don't know calculus or Hebrew. I'm keeping this self-contained. And third, this is a general audience's academic talk. It doesn't teach religion, it teaches about religion. And so we respect and welcome people of any faith or no faith. And finally, you know, I wanted to go big, so the topic today is infinity, but the talk is finite. And this whole session should end well before 8, which on its side, of course, is a common symbol for infinity. In case you're wondering, here is the history of that symbol, of what it dates back to, and it's only fitting that it was introduced by someone who did math and religion. So that's fitting with the theme of our sponsoring organization. Someone else who did both math and religion is Pascal. And I just really find this particular quote of his very, very moving. When I consider the small span of my life absorbed in the eternity of all time, or the small part of space which I can touch or see engulfed by the infinite immensity of spaces that I know not and that know me not, I am frightened and astonished to see myself here instead of there, now instead of then. And there are many other mathematicians who thought a lot about religion. These are not just exceptions. It's really not so strange. And even in my own department, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. For example, Tian Lim has a math paper on karma, and Granville Sewell has a book on intelligent design. And there's people in other departments at my university who have also made connections to their respective faiths in their work as well. So we're not as unusual as you might think. And so I don't forget the thank yous. I want to go ahead and do them now. So thank you again to our funders and our sponsors, to Rabbi Zeidman for agreeing to come along on this crazy ride with me, and to all those who gave me feedback on all or part of my slides. But of course, any errors that remain are my responsibility. We're also grateful that we've managed in a short period of time to get print, radio, and TV media coverage. This is a screenshot from an interview that Rabbi Zeidman and I did last week. And although I did not know at the time of recording the interview what rotating ad banner they were going to have next to my name, so that's kind of funny. Okay, so let's dive in. So what word comes to mind when you think of infinity? Just think about it. If you want to go ahead and type a word in the chat window, that's fine. I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it or type. It's no right answer. It's just whatever comes up. All right, so I'm seeing some interesting answers here. Oh, wow. Nice. When I've asked this in the past, some of the answers I get are things like endlessness, boundlessness, indefiniteness, inconceivability. And sometimes the answers are more emotional, like awe, futility, fear. So it's interesting. And so one of the things that we've been encouraging all the speakers in this series to do is to include a slide that kind of says, what started us on this journey in the first place? And so here's my slide for that. My spark was 2 decades ago when I was teaching at Emory High School in Houston, Texas, a pluralistic community Jewish day school. And, I know this will be hard to believe because we all know math is cool, but there were some students who really didn't try to hide that they were only in class because they were required to, and they were just learning enough to do well in the SAT, but it just didn't captivate them inherently at all. And so I tried a lot of things to try to counter that, to try to engage them. And one of the things I tried was looking for ways to connect the math content to the things they were learning in their Judaics classes. And it just took a life of its own. And it made it more fun for me too, because I was learning things that I hadn't been taught either, those connections. And so some of the topics that I gather material on, either creating it or finding it that other people have done, included, gematria is sort of the obvious example that a lot of people think math and Judaism would be. That's like the Hebrew equivalent, the numerical equivalent of a Hebrew word. But there's, that's not what this talk or this whole speaker series is focusing on. So have no fear, we're not going to dive into that. But there's other things too, plenty of things besides gematria, like mathematical modeling and geometry and logic and counting. And of course, the topic today, infinity. And I wrote up some of these connections and published them in journals like Journal of Mathematics and Culture, and some other venues as well. And so I ended up, taking something that was really a deep part of my personal identity and work experience and finding a way to add it to my professional vita or resume. So that was neat. But it's not just something that you see in, in technical papers. We see the word infinity a lot in popular culture. And so here's 4 examples of lyrics from the pop world or the folk world where you see the word infinity used. And I'm sure you can, if you think there's a great example I should add for next time, you can let me know through the chat window as well. Here's a kid's album that has the title Infinity with a picture that I like a lot that's kind of fun. And the concepts of infinity have also appeared in math songs. As Rabbi Zeidman mentioned, I do write math songs also. And 2 of the songs I've written, Cantor's Coat and Hotel Called Infinity, to the tune of Hotel California. You can find those at the webpage, larrylesser.com/greatest lesser hits. If you're interested in hearing a recording of that, but we're not going to fit that into today. Okay, so in the chat window, type the English name of the biggest finite number you know, an actual number, not just something like jillion, gazillion, Brazilian, whatever, I'll give you 10 seconds to do that. Wow, we got some ringers in the crowd. Some people have definitely done their homework. Okay, great. So there are prefix patterns for every, 3 more digits of a number. You get to the next prefix and you can kind of see, if you know some Latin root stuff, you can see that there's patterns to them. But I mean, it's hard to have intuition when the numbers get really big, right? I mean, it's one thing to talk about millions and billions, but we don't have a lot of experience beyond billions. Well, I guess actually this month we do. This month we had a stimulus passed that's in the trillions. And also this month we have March Madness starting, and the number of possible brackets for March Madness is in the quintillions, believe it or not. So that's why no one's ever had a perfect bracket. It's really hard to do that. So it turns out that a really big name number that a number of you mentioned in the chat window is a Google. And notice it's spelled slightly differently from the search engine Google. It is 10 to the power of 100, which means it is a 1 followed by 100 zeros. I've written it out there. And just to give you context for just how big that is, it's more than the number of atoms in the universe. So it's pretty big. However, there are numbers even bigger than that I see at least one person in the chat window has already anticipated, namely a Googleplex, which is the numeral 1 followed by a Google of zeros. And there's no time even to write that number out, even if you started when the universe was born. So just to give you some context there. And I find it really fun that the company Google named its headquarters Googleplex. So it's very, very fitting, very fun. All right. So as I was preparing for this talk, I found myself asking myself and wondering, so what's the biggest name number in Jewish text? And if you go into the book of Daniel, you see that talks about myriads upon myriads. And a myriad is like 10,000. So you got 10,000s of 10,000s. And if you do 10,000 times 10,000, you get 100 million. So yeah, well, that's pretty big. And if you're willing to go beyond Tanakh into Talmud, which is a commentary in the Torah, then you can construct a number that's a lot bigger than that, namely 10 to the power of 18, which is 1 quintillion. See, we did reach the quintillions. And this refers to the number of stars in the sky from Tractate Brachot. If you multiply all the red numbers together, you get a product that is bigger than 1 quintillion. So that's pretty big. I don't know, but maybe there's an astronomer in the crowd who can tell us how close that number actually is. Okay, so you're not going to be shocked by this big news that there is no biggest number. If you have the set of what we call the counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on, there is no largest element in that set because you can always add 1 to whatever you think the largest number is and get something even bigger, right? Okay. So let's start simple. Simple as 1, 2, 3. Do you think the quantity 1 plus 2 added to 3 is equal to 1 plus the quantity 2 plus 3? So in the chat window, you can type yes or no, or at your webcam, you can give me a thumbs up or thumbs down for yes or no, respectively. Let's see what y'all think. And you probably remember order of operations says that you have to do what's in the parentheses first. And remember, the answers are not graded. Okay, most people seem to be saying yes, and that is correct. They are both equal to 6. And the reason that this works is, you may remember from your schooling, there is a property of addition called the associative property, which says that if you're adding up a bunch of numbers, that no matter how you group those numbers, the sum is going to be the same. See, how you group them is how you're associating them together. So that is a property. Okay, so let's try our first anonymous Zoom poll that Rabbi Zeidman will activate for us, because now I'm going to ask you a question about an infinite sum. What if you have 1 plus -1 plus 1 plus -1 and so on? What is that going to be equal to? And I'll give you 10 seconds or so to. All right, so it looks like most people are saying 0, but a few people are saying it depends, and only one person has voted for number 1. So I'll let you see what your your results were. Okay, so here is the answer. It does depend on grouping, okay? Because if you group 2 at a time, then yes, you would get 0. But if you let the first element stand first and then start grouping 2 at a time, you would end up with 1. And the person who noticed that was, guess what? Another guy who did math and religion, okay? Now, by the way, I realize that all of the examples so far are indeed guys, but let me reassure you that in our speaker series, about half the speakers are amazing women. So we've addressed that and corrected the historical imbalance. Okay, so, but the big takeaway here is that when sums or sets are infinite, we may need new ideas. That just because something intuitive as the associative property seems to be so obvious and so common sense that, like, how could that ever not be true? Well, we just saw an example where it wasn't true. And so we want to sort of be prepared, have an open mind to not assume that the rules that work in finite mathematics are automatically going to transfer over to the world of infinity. That's sort of the light bulb moment here, okay? All right, so Ein Sof is a term in Hebrew which translates to without end or infinity. And it's actually one of the many names of God that is used in Judaism. It was introduced in the 13th century by a mystic, someone who worked with Jewish mysticism, otherwise known as Kabbalah. And that's a Kabbalistic diagram in the lower right corner there. Don't ask me to explain it. And what's cool is that I asked people, so if you're a classroom math teacher in Israel teaching a secular subject, what word would you use to refer to infinity? And the answer was Ein Sof. And so it's really this connection is quite direct here. There's also the infinite in Jewish liturgy. And by that, we're not necessarily saying that services feel like they take forever. But 2 prayers that are pretty common in many denominations of Judaism are Yigal and Adonal. And as you can see, the Yigal prayer mentions Ein Sof, referring to God being without end. And the Adonal prayer talks about God having no beginning and no end. And so you have that language in your prayer that maybe you didn't think about it in this context, but it's there, it's in there, okay? And so in general, religious studies scholars have written about what the theological infinite, or what's sometimes called the absolute infinite, how to describe it. And they have described it as, Gilles LeBlanc summarizes it as unbounded, unlimited. It's not just a collection of things. It's not thing you can construct from the finite. It's beyond all that, okay? And so that's how religious studies people see it. And so now the question is, well, how do math people see infinity? It turns out there's 2 conceptions of mathematical infinity that you will see very commonly. The first is called potential infinity, and that's usually associated with that infinity symbol, the sideways 8 that we saw at the beginning. And it's a way of thinking about infinity as a process that doesn't end. But still, you're always thinking about it as a finite number of steps, where at any given point, it's still finite, but you can always have more. Like with the counting numbers, there's always one that's bigger, right? So that's the potential infinity, or the process way of looking at it. But there's also a way of looking at it that's called actual infinity, where you look at an infinity as an object that exists all at once in totality, already realized or encapsulated, as if you had done the process an infinite number of times. And so if we talk about the set of counting numbers as a thing, as something that it's just all there in one object, even though we know there's an infinite number of numbers within that set, we can talk about the set itself as an object of actual infinity, as if it has been completed. So again, it's a subtle distinction. It's abstract. It takes a while to get your head around it. If throughout this talk, you don't get everything right away. Don't at all. I mean, like I didn't get everything I knew about infinity in 1 hour either, trust me. So get what you can, and at least this gives you a point of departure to look up more things. It turns out that some UTEP people have actually done some mathematics education research into this. Murat Shoshanov and Grace Babarinsa found that college students did not always have both of these conceptions. In other words, the ideal is that someone has both conceptions at once and it's all integrated in their understanding. They can see it both ways. But what they found is that that's rarely the case, that sometimes college students would see it one way, sometimes the other way. And which way they saw it would depend on the task at hand. It would depend on the context. And so that was an interesting finding. So just to let you know about that. Okay, so let's make this even more concrete. So consider a cookie. I know everyone just had dinner, so think about dessert now. So you've got a cookie here. Now, imagine you've got your kid who eats half the cookie one day, but leaves half the cookie. And then the next day they come downstairs and they eat half of what's left. So now there's a quarter of the cookie left, right? And then the next day they come and they eat half of that. So now we're down to an eighth of a cookie and so on. So using the process interpretation or the potential infinity, you could try to make the argument that he'll never finish eating the cookie because there's always half of what's left remaining for the next day. You never quite finish it, right? Of course, we all know that it is possible to eat an entire cookie, and that we want to believe that there's a way of looking at it that says that this sequence of a half plus a fourth plus an eighth plus a 16th and so on must in some sense converge so that you can actually eat the whole cookie, right? And so that's sort of, again, the paradox that a lot of infinite paradoxes are kind of based on, but it helps to kind of see it with this cookie thing. And so here's a way to put some equations into it. Again, you've got this diagram where you've got half, a fourth, and so on, and you can see that less and less is available. So under the potential infinity, at any finite point, there is still some cookie left, right? But in the limit where you let that process continue infinitely, you really do reach the whole. And if someone tries to say, well, no, you don't, you reach something less than the whole, then I can say, well, then I'll eat half of that so that I get even closer to one from what you said was the limit. So I can always get closer to one than any stopping point you might give me. So therefore, that's an indirect way of saying you really do reach one, Anyway, but again, it's even when you take a calculus class, it's a mind blower to wrestle with this. Okay, so the founder of set theory is Georg Cantor, and he had a really important idea about looking at infinite sets. And he says that to know whether two sets have the same size, you have to see if you can make a one-to-one correspondence between their elements, okay? So here's an example. Suppose we have a set containing three letters, T, M, and S, in honor of Temple Mount Sinai. And suppose we have another set containing the numerals 1, 2, 3. Well, we can make a one-to-one correspondence. So that shows that those two sets have the same number of elements. Notice that elements don't have to be numbers. They can be letters, they can be pictures, whatever, right? But these two sets have the same size. They have the same number of elements because they have a one-to-one correspondence. Those of you who have taken a lot of math will know that there's a technical term called cardinality, but again, I promise to keep this jargon free, so I'm not going to use that term, but it's there. All right. So now, since we're toggling back and forth between math and religion throughout this talk, you may find yourself wondering, is there a one-to-one correspondence in religion? Glad you asked. And the answer is, yes, there is. So by taking a census, counting a population, it's done by some kind of proxy as a way to respect the infinite value of human life. And so in the Torah, we see a couple of examples. We see from Exodus, actually that's from the Torah portion we read just 2 weeks ago in Synagogues, isn't it? That by every person donating a half shekel coin, then you just count the coins, and that enables you to indirectly count the people, right? Or in the book of Samuel, each person brought a lamb, so you count the lambs, and therefore you counted the people. So again, it's this indirect way so that you're not just reducing people themselves to a number by counting them in a direct way, okay? Another example is that when I looked into this further, that even the modern census, the census in the modern state of Israel, also uses some techniques of indirectness in this sort of similar spirit by recording names on unnumbered blank lines or having the tabulation done by devices, not people. So I thought that was fascinating. And another example where it comes up in everyday current religious life is there's certain prayers in a Jewish service that can only be said if there is a prayer quorum, so to speak, or minyan of at least 10 eligible people. And so rather than just sort of bluntly pointing at people and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you say a verse of Torah as a way to indirectly count them. A 10-word verse of Torah. This is the one that's perhaps the most frequently used, but some people have used others as well. And so this way, each person is being associated with something of infinite value, a word of Torah, right? One cool thing someone pointed out to me is that the last word of this 10-word phrase is ha'olam, which in this context is forever, but it can also mean world. So if you're missing that 10th person, you're missing a world. So I always found that a beautiful thought. Okay, so now we're going to toggle back to math, and we're going to use this idea of one-to-one correspondence to see if two sets are the same size. Okay, so we'll start off simple. Here's two finite sets. The set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is that set bigger than 5, 6, 7, 8? So we'll have the Zoom poll here. Go ahead. All right, I'll end the poll. It seems like a pretty strong mandate for yes. And indeed, that is the answer. So you get a smiley face for that. Very good. No grades, but you get a smiley face. And again, the reason is because we can't find a one-to-one correspondence. If we try to match them up where everyone's holding a hand, we see there's 4 members of the first set that don't have a hand to hold in the second set. So that's why we can really say the sets are not the same size. Okay, maybe that was too easy. Let's try a little harder one. So that example was 2 sets that are each finite. So let's make this a little harder by making both of those sets infinite. I added a ... So we'll launch the next polling question now. So is the set of numbers that goes forever starting from 1 bigger than the set of numbers that goes forever starting from 5? Again, the question is, do they have a one-to-one correspondence? So yes or no that they have the same size. A little more neck and neck here, almost, so slightly more for no, but still fairly close. Okay, about 56% said no, and that is the correct answer. Let's see why. Because if you do sort of an offset or shift, you can see that you can still do this one-to-one pairing, right? Where everyone in the first set has a hand to hold in the second set. You can't think of any element in the first set that's not accounted for or any element in the second set that's not accounted for. If you wanted to use algebraic notation, you could say every element n in the first set can be matched with the element n plus 4 in the second set. So we've demonstrated that there is a one-to-one correspondence. All right. So we'll stop sharing that one. Let's see. Okay, let's do one more Zoom poll. Zoom poll number 4. So now it's going to be a little trickier because these are still both infinite sets, but now there's an infinite number of numbers, not a finite number of numbers, but an infinite number of numbers in the first set that are not in the second set, right? Because the first set is all the counting numbers. The second set is just the even counting numbers. So in other words, it's omitting the odd counting numbers. So yes, they're the same size. I mean, sorry, yes, yes, the first set is bigger, or B, no, they are the same size. Okay, so let's end the polling here and share those results. And we see that 3/4 of you said that they are the same size. So y'all are great students. You're catching on awesome with this. And because, again, you can draw this one-to-one mapping where every number goes to its double. 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, or in general, n goes to 2n. And so we've established the one-to-one correspondence. And so that concludes our 4 Zoom polling questions. See the 4 questions, just like Passover coming up. Okay, so and we could have done this with the counting numbers and the odd numbers, and that all that would have changed is that we would have had n going to 2n minus 1 to make the mapping work. So that's how that would work. And it was really fun to see that there is actually a comic strip that mentions this result, a syndicated, national comic strip. It's called Fraz, where this brilliant 3rd grader, Caulfield, in the first panel says, in infinity, there are just as many odd numbers as there are even and odd numbers. and then in the last panel, Caulfield says, in infinity, there are just as many lame jokes as there are lame jokes and good jokes. I just love that. So you just never know when popular culture is going to incorporate something like math, but it's always fun when it does. But let's just kind of like notice something here. This is like another light bulb moment, right? Because what we just said is that we have an infinite set that has a subset, a clear proper subset, but they're still the same size. I mean, that's not true for any pair of finite sets, right? I mean, this is definitely a rule. This is just definitely a phenomenon that only happens with infinite sets. This does not happen to finite sets. So it's another example where the laws of finite land may not carry over to infinite land, just like the associative property didn't automatically remain always true. So just to kind of call that to your attention. And so, of course, since we're toggling back and forth between math and religion, you're probably wondering, so Professor Lesser, hey, that rhymes. Is there a concept in religion of the part and the whole having the same size or being equivalent? Glad you asked. And the answer, of course, is yes. Here's 3 examples that I've been able to find so far. I'm sure there's even more examples. And so if you know of one, feel free to put in the chat window for us to look at or discuss at the end of the talk. One is there is a Jewish legal principle of miktzat hayom kekulo, that a small part of the day is considered like the whole day. And the most common way you encounter that is if you have to mourn for 7 days, God forbid, on the last day, you just a small piece of that day, counts as the full day, and you can end the restrictions and start to return to your routine. Another example comes from the Mishnah, comes from Talmud, that whoever saves one life, it's like they saved the whole world. So again, that's another example of where the part is like the whole. And there's also a quote by the Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, who says, when you hold a part of God's essence, you hold all of it. And that in turn traces back even further back than the Baal Shem Tov. And so the sensibility of the part equaling the whole somehow does have precedent in religion. Okay, so we've talked about the counting numbers a lot, but do we have a name for the size? I mean, it's one thing just to say it's infinite, but is there a name for this, this infinite number? And it turns out there is. It's Aleph Null. Aleph Null. And so if you have some familiarity with Hebrew, you recognize that is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so we call this a trans-finite number. It's because it's beyond finite. It's an infinite number. It's certainly larger than any finite number. And so you might be wondering, well, where do we get that from? Why Aleph? Okay, well, it was chosen by that guy we met earlier, Georg Cantor, who, while his name might make you assume that he is Jewish, he actually lived as a devout Lutheran. However, he likely had Jewish ancestry on one or both sides. There's different sources say slightly different things, so I'm not going to take a definitive stand on that. Aleph turns out to also be the first letter in the Hebrew words for infinity, for one, and for God. And it's also mentioned in Joseph Dobbin's biography of Cantor, why he thought that was a particularly nice choice. And so it was a very intentional choice, and it's very cool that he did that. So it turns out that these trans-finite cardinal numbers have their own rules of arithmetic. That, again, just because things are true for finite arithmetic does not mean they're always going to be true here. So, for example, Aleph null plus 1 is still Aleph null. That's not true for finite numbers. We don't say 7 plus 1 is still 7, right? No, it's 8. Or there's Aleph null odd numbers and Aleph null even numbers. But when you add Aleph null and Aleph null, you don't get 2 Aleph null, you get still Aleph null, because all the counting numbers is still Aleph null. Again, you don't have that being true for finite things. And so these are some rules for the cardinal arithmetic, so to speak. Okay, so this sets us up for, so I guess I will do a math song. It's really short. Well, it's really long or short, depending on how you look at it. It's the world's longest math song. Aleph, no bottles of beer on the wall. Aleph, no bottles of beer. Take one down, pass it around, and there's still Aleph, no bottles of beer on the wall. And it's the same song over and over, right? Because you can keep adding one or subtracting one. It's still Aleph, no, right? It doesn't change. So the song becomes boring after the first few thousand verses. Okay, so let's start applying this more to Judaism in some further ways. So in the Torah, there are commandments, and one way of tabulating them says that there are 613 of them. And but the Talmud, the commentary on the Torah, says that identifies a few specific commandments where that commandment is so special it equals the other 612 combined in value. And one example they give is tzedakah, which is translated either as righteousness or of charity, is as important as all the others combined. And when I first came across things like that, I thought, okay, this is a rabbi being dramatic. This is like a rhetorical thing to give it emphasis, you know. But when I thought about it mathematically, like, okay, but does this actually make sense mathematically? I realized actually it does, you know, and because if we call m the value of tzedakah, and we let and each of the other commandments also has the value m, what we're saying is that m equals 612 m's, or 612 times m, right? Now that equation, technically it's true if you stick 0 in for both m's, but hopefully we all agree that charity does not have a value of 0. But if you put any non-zero finite number in there, the equation is not true, right? 3 does not equal 612 times 3. However, if we put our friend Aleph null in, then it is true, because Aleph null does equal 612 times Aleph null. So it actually is perfectly consistent with the laws of mathematics for handling infinity. So I thought that was kind of neat. Let's apply this now to the value of life. I mentioned that there's a quote from the Talmud, whoever saves one life saves the whole world. That quote was actually featured in the movie Schindler's List. So even if you've never seen or studied Talmud, you have been exposed to this particular piece of Talmud. And so this comes up in a number of places. So it comes up, you know, why you can't say one life is worth more than another life, because who's to say your blood is redder, basically. And so this is why in Judaism, usually you can kill someone in self-defense. If someone's trying to kill you, you can kill them, but you're not allowed to murder someone to save your life. That there's a difference there. So that's one life versus another. But what's a little more not obvious, perhaps, is, well, what about one life versus many lives? Because some of us might be, I don't know, like John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, and say, well, aren't 5 lives worth 5 times more than one life or something, right? You might think it's okay to kill someone if you can save lots of people. So again, Judaism addresses this. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin says that saving many lives at the expense of taking one innocent life is not permitted, because you can't say many infinities are worth more than one infinity. And in the Talmud, which was codified into Jewish law, there's a place where it says, if a group of Jews are told, hand over one of your group or we'll kill you all, even if all of them would be killed, they still aren't allowed to say, okay, here's Jake, go ahead and kill Jake. You can't do that. And so again, this is totally consistent with the way mathematics views infinity, because to say 5 lives can't be worth more than 1 life, well, that's like, you can think of that metaphorically or mathematically as saying that 5 times Aleph null is still Aleph null. It's not greater than Aleph null. And, if you want to get more into ethics, you can look at the trolley problem, which has been discussed with a Jewish lens as well as a secular lens. Okay, so a natural question you may have at this point, among many probably, is do all infinite sets have this same size? Do they all have the size Aleph null? In other words, is it like either it's infinite or it's not? Or is there more than one size of infinity? Are some infinities bigger than others? Are some bigger than Aleph null? That's sort of a natural question. If that seems strange to you that there could be more than one size of infinity, in Judaism, maybe it's not so strange, because in Judaism, there are levels of infinite spiritual worlds. And again, I'm not a scholar on Jewish mysticism, so don't ask me to go too deep into this slide, but there are people on this call who can handle Jewish questions that are above my pay grade, so they can chime in during Q&A on this. But this is just sort of a quick diagram just to kind of show you that there are these infinite levels of soul and levels of the world. Notice the top level of the world, by the way, is our friend the Ein Sof. But again, this gets into really abstract stuff that just can't be covered in 2 minutes. But there it is. Okay, so back to math. So what we're asking is there a set so much bigger than the counting numbers 1, 2, 3, and so on, that there's no way to put it into one-to-one correspondence with the counting numbers? That's what we're really asking. So it turns out that Cantor proved, and if someone asks during Q&A, I have some slides that outline how, if you're curious, that the set of all fractions, because obviously there's more, it seems like there's more fractions, numbers like 2/3 and 7/5, than there are just counting numbers. But it turns out there's a way to arrange fractions so that you can still match them up with the counting numbers with this one-to-one correspondence. And so therefore, the size of the set of all fractions is still Aleph null. It's not any bigger than the counting numbers. So then you think, okay, well, what's bigger than the set of fractions? What's a set of numbers in math that's even bigger than that might be even bigger than fractions that I can try? Like the real numbers. The real numbers are all points on a continuum. So that includes not just rational numbers, but also irrational numbers like pi and the square root of 2, whose decimals never repeat or die. There's more real numbers than fractions in some intuitive sense. And it turns out it's true even in this one-to-one correspondence sense. It has been proven also by Cantor. And again, I can also outline it during Q&A if that's what someone wants to see a taste of. There is no way to match up with one-to-one correspondence, the counting numbers, and the set of all real numbers. So that means it does make sense to say there are more real numbers than fractions, or there are more real numbers than counting numbers, because it would have a size greater than Aleph null. Here's an excerpt from a poet, Amy Umeatsu, who actually taught high school for a few decades while publishing like 5 volumes of poetry. I love people who do that. And from this poem called This Thing Called Infinity, she has this stanza. Mathematicians are the real jokesters when it comes to playing with the mind. How counting from 1 to forever is somehow smaller than the set of all values between 1 and 2. I just love that. But again, it's not just being poetic. That's actually totally consistent with what we've been talking about. But hold on. I mean, this is like another light bulb moment, because if we're saying there's more than one size of infinity, and for people who haven't been exposed to this before, because unfortunately, even if you've gone through, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, there's no guarantee that you actually were taught this stuff. Most people only learn this if they take like a math history class or a math for liberal arts kind of class or something like that. But I just think it's too cool not to share with everyone. So thank you for being here. So there is indeed more than one size of infinity, but wait, there's more. It turns out there's an infinity of infinities. And once again, Cantor was the one to show it. He found that if you form the set of all possible subsets of an infinite set, that resulting set is too big to be matched up in one-to-one correspondence with that original set. In other words, there is an infinite sequence of infinities, Aleph null, Aleph 1, Aleph 2, and so on. So that is a mind blower, another light bulb moment. And so because this speaker series talks about math and religion, it's important to mention that Cantor really saw his math as being very much in harmony with his faith. These are some excerpts from letters that we have from him. And you can see that he really sees the beauty of these trans-finite numbers as reflecting the beauty of creation and the creator. And the quote in red, to me, really hammers it home that instead of diminishing the extent of God's nature and dominion, the trans-finite numbers actually make it all the greater. The way I look at that concept is most religions would probably agree that God is ultimately beyond full human understanding. Okay, at least God is beyond my understanding, and maybe there's someone on the call who feels they do totally understand God, but I don't. And so, if we now have an expanded concept of how big infinity can be, but now we realize that God has to be even bigger than that, in effect, we've raised the floor for how big God is, because God has to be even more amazing than we ever imagined, right? So to me and to Cantor, obviously, this is a way of testimony to God rather than something that, takes away something from God. There was also support from the church at the time Cantor was going through this stuff. And Pope Leo XIII encouraged investigations into science, including specifically in infinity. There was a German priest who believed that actual infinity, remember that's the more subtle kind of infinity, not the potential infinity, that he believed that actual infinity could be contemplated by the human mind and help us get closer to understanding God. And so there was that kind of harmony with religion at the time. But there was also resistance. In particular, there was a German mathematician, Kronecker, who at one point was Cantor's mentor, but he kind of withdrew because he was kind of opposed to Cantor's ideas. Kronecker is one of these guys who really believe that we should stick to the finite and not talk about these actual infinities. You see his quote, "God created the natural numbers and all the rest is stuff that people are making up," right? And he really tried to make life hard for Cantor. I mean, he at one point blocked him from getting a job, a position, and another time he kept him from publishing some of his work. It was not fun. Cantor really had some tough times in his life. Was not always fully appreciated during his life, but by the end, we now see that Cantor is pretty universally recognized as an amazing genius. Another German mathematician says that from the paradise that Cantor created for us, no one shall be able to expel us. So in the end, he is definitely recognized as having done some really amazing things. And so the last point I want to make sort of wraps things up full circle by sort of linking the infinite back to the finite. As Rabbi Zeidman mentioned, I did release last year an album of original non-liturgical Jewish songs called Sparks. But my first recorded Jewish song was like 13 years before that on this album by the group Sababa. And the song draws upon a piece of Torah that includes kind of a paradoxical verse. "And they shall make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst." Wait, how is that possible? The infinite God is going to somehow be able to fit in our finite space to be with us? Like that's, how's that going to work? So it turns out there's a Midrash, which is another form of commentary that is a pretty fun one. When the Holy One said to Moses, "Make me a tabernacle," Moses was dumbfounded and said, "The glory of the Holy One fills the upper worlds and the lower." And he said to make him a tabernacle? How is that going to work, right? And the Holy One replies to Moses, "Well, I don't see things the way you do. I will come down and contract my presence within a space of 1 cubit by 1 cubit." And by the way, a cubit is the distance from your elbow to the tip of your longest finger. So it's going to vary from person to person, but it's roughly 18 inches, plus or minus whatever, right? So, and by the way, notice that, people who have studied like Jewish creation stories in Kabbalah, the Big Bang and everything, there's this term, tzimtzum, where God contracts his presence to allow space for the world to exist, But what's fascinating is in that context, God is contracting God's self God is removing God's self from the world to make room for us. Whereas here in this quote, God is contracting God's self to be with us. So it's a really profound concept in religion. But again, we're going to try to make sense of it with math, because again, the theme here is that when ideas in religion just seem so out there in terms of how abstract they are, or if they seem exaggerated, if there's a way to understand them with some of our secular tools, why not? Because it's a way to for religious ideas not to seem so strange, and vice versa. Maybe ideas in religion can help us understand math more comfortably too, right? So Cantor showed that a line or a square or a cube that has finite dimensions actually has the same number of points as that same object with larger or even infinite dimensions. And so here's an example with a circle. So think of this as we're going back to this one-to-one correspondence idea, but now it's more geometrical instead of algebraic. So you've got an inner circle and an outer circle. And of course you might say, well, the outer circle has a larger circumference, right? Well, yeah, it does. And yet somehow the two circles have the same number of points on their respective boundaries. How is that true? Well, imagine this sort of radius arm that's going to sort of rotate around the circle. For every point A on the outer circle, it's passing through a point B on the inner circle. And so every point on the inner circle and outer circle gets hit. There's no point left out as that radius arm sweeps around. Therefore, no matter how much, you can make that outer circle even bigger and just keep extending the radius arm to keep up with it. And it's still true. No matter how big that second circle is, it's going to have the same number of points on the circumference, on the boundary, okay? Cantor also showed a result that's even more mind-blowing because it crosses dimensions. Cantor showed that a 1-unit line segment, like from 0 to 1, that's one-dimensional, actually has the same number of points on it as the region inside a 1-by-1 square, which is a 2-dimensional region. And I know this is like too quick to fully contemplate it, but it'll be recorded. You can pause it right now, right here, if you're listening to it in the future, and contemplate it more. But that's basically how that can work. So, and here's another thing where you can show that a semicircle, which clearly has a finite length, has the same number of points as an infinite length horizontal line. Because if you draw these sort of slanted lines from the center of the semicircle, you can see that every point on the semicircle, with the possible exceptions of the two boundary endpoints, and there's technical ways to account for that, so don't worry about that. But all the other points for sure, any point on the semicircle takes you to, if you follow that diagonal line, to a point on the infinite length horizontal line and vice versa. And so again, this is how something can be infinite and finite at the same time, how the infinite and the finite can coexist, how God can be transcendent and beyond us and yet be immanent at the same time. It's not quite the contradiction that it's still a magical concept. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to be like a magician who, once you show people the trick, it's like, oh, well, that's not a big deal anymore. No, it's still a big deal. It's still beautiful, but it's cool to have more understanding of it. And if these last comments about dimension intrigue you, we will have more attention on dimension, I have to mention, with our next speaker in this series, Dr. Kim Jongarius, whose talk will be titled, Does God Live in Another Dimension? How What We Assume Shapes What We Conclude. You can see it's a different day of the week. It's going to be on Sunday. We're mixing it up here. And you obviously know how to sign up because you were able to get here. But if you're watching the recording, this is the website you'll go to sign up. Each talk requires its own individual sign-in. This is the big picture of all 6 speakers, just to let you see the big picture of it all. And you can see we have speakers that bring in Jewish background, Christian background, speakers that talk about Muslim mathematics. So we have a lot of diversity here. We've got males and females. We have people in the United States and beyond the United States. So it's a really terrific series that we've been able to put together, and we're so appreciative of the people who have come together to make this happen, and our sponsors and our funders. So thank you for sharing my affinity for infinity. See, I could have done a triple run title. I could have done infinity for divinity and infinity, but I thought that was too much. And if you are curious about some of the math and Judaism papers I have written, they all happen to be open access. So by going to this website, larrylusser.com/Judaism, you will find links to those papers if you'd like to read more. And so Rabbi Zeidman has been patiently collecting and curating questions that have been coming in. And so I will let him moderate the Q&A. But if you have questions that are occurring to you only now, that's fine. It's not too late to type them into the chat, and Rabbi Zeidman will notice them and be able to sequence them in the list. And also Rabbi Zeidman will be launching a Google Forms survey either now or maybe a little bit later. I'm not sure which, but you'll see a link pop up in the chat window, I think, and it should just take 2 minutes, but it will give us very valuable feedback as we still have 5 more speakers to go. It's always good to get feedback, especially on the beginning of a series that very few people have tried to do. So in fact, I don't know if you know, but of the 34 programs that Sinai and Synapses has sponsored in various sciences, we are actually, turns out we are the first to connect Judaism specifically to mathematics. And so again, I really appreciate Rabbi Zeidman and Rabbi Middleman for taking this ride with me to see if we can really pull it off. And I'm very happy with how it's gone so far. So Rabbi Zeidman, I'll let you moderate.
Thank you, Dr. Lesser. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. So thank you for sharing this with us. We've spoken about this, you and I, in the lead up to this presentation, and it still blows my mind to think about how intertwined the broad thought of religious and divine infinity and mathematical infinity is. And thank you for bringing it down to even to my level. You know, I see, you know, just as I say that, I see Jan putting in a chat, you know, that there's a lot of confusion. There's so much confusion there. There is so much to be confused by.
We're confused on a higher level, at least.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've brought it to a new place and to a different, special place. And I'm so extremely grateful from a personal level to have the chance to think about the infinite in new and different ways. I'll bring up a couple of questions, but I want to invite anybody who has a question to share any questions in the chat, and I'll try to keep up with any questions that come in as I also pose the questions. I also know how this often works. and the presentation is concluded, so people think, oh, I'm gonna, go about and do whatever. Please don't leave without taking the survey that I've put into the chat. So that I went ahead, I put that in there now, and please feel free to take that before you head off. So there were a couple of questions around the cookie piece of the conversation, right? One is, and I don't necessarily understand these questions, but maybe you'll understand these questions. One of them is, what happens when you reach the Planck limit?
Yeah, that's getting into physics about how indivisible, what is the smallest particle that can't be divided anymore. And I'm not a physics scholar, that's beyond my pay grade. If there's someone in the audience who can give an answer to that, I'm welcome. I invite you to share your wisdom with us.
Okay, and so I've learned yet another new thing. And then somebody asked, and I think you may have answered this, but just because they put it in the chat, the idea of always being able to get closer to one, referring to a process. Isn't that referring to a process rather than a completed whole? So there was maybe a little confusion on their part about what the process versus whole, and always getting closer to one is part of a process and as a whole.
Right. Here's another example I'll just put in the chat window, actually. It turns out 0.9999 and so on equals 1. And a lot of people say, no, it doesn't. It doesn't quite ever get to 1. But you can actually prove that it does. So there's a process where you keep putting on another 9, but yet it does reach that limit. So again, it's, if you want a quick way to see that, you can say if x equals 0.9999, then 10x equals 9.99999. And then 10x minus x is 9x, and 9.999 minus 0.9999 equals 9. But if 9x equals 9, x really does equal 1. So again, I know I went through that fast, but that's, so yeah, it really, there's a lot of fascinating infinity paradoxes. You've probably heard the one with like Achilles racing the turtle, where Achilles gives the turtle a head start. And so people say, okay, by the time Achilles gets to where this turtle started, the turtle has gone a little bit further. And now by the time the Achilles catches up to where the turtle then got to, the turtle has gone ahead still some further a little bit, and therefore never catches up to the turtle. We, of course, all know that Achilles does catch up to the turtle and wins the race. So it's really unpacking this stuff of, are you infinitely dividing time or space or objects, or, and it goes beyond what we can easily answer in just a minute. But hopefully I've given people inspiration to want to look up more stuff on this. There's plenty of stuff online if you start Googling to let this soak in more.
So that was one of the questions, was what are your suggestions with regards to looking at more information about infinity?
Yeah, so I see Rabbi Middleman recommends the YouTube channel Numberphile. So yeah, there are a lot of people that specializes in communicating math for popular audiences, just like Bill Nye does with science, right? There's a lot of math people that do a good job of popularizing math ideas. Art Benjamin has a whole, video course series called The Joy of Mathematics. So there are plenty of people that do this. Yeah.
Got it.
And you may not know, there's actually a National Museum of Mathematics. It's in New York. And when the pandemic ends, you should go to it. It's always fun to ride the square-wheeled tricycle, for example. And they have a lot of content they put online as well. During this pandemic, they've had to do more of that. That you can attend a lot of their classes, through Zoom right now. And they do a great job of explaining math in a way that middle school students can understand it, or younger or older. They have different things pitched to different age groups.
Thank you.
So yeah, I really hope that people leave this wanting to know more about math and Judaism or and religion. You know, it's there's a lot of us might be kind of scarred by our uninspiring childhood experiences or something, but you know, then you get a fresh look at it and it becomes alive again.
There's another question about the Hilbert Hotel, and I don't know about
Hilbert's Hotel. Yeah, I didn't. Okay. So the idea is, so imagine a hotel that has an infinite number of rooms, but every room has someone in it. Okay. And so you come up to this hotel and it says no vacancy. How's this gonna work? So what they do is they ask the person in room 1 to move to room 2. The person who is in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. Well, you just freed up room 1 for the new person, right? And so even though every room is full and there's an infinite number of guests, there's always room for more guests. In fact, there's even room for an infinite number of new guests, because you could say, okay, everyone go to the double of your room number. If you were in room 1, go to 2. If you were in 2, go to 4. If you were in 3, go to 6, and so on. Well, now you just freed up all the odd numbered rooms. So you've got an infinite number of rooms that are now vacant. And then when it comes time to pay the bill, that's always fun, because you can say, person 2 pays the bill for person 3, person 3 pays the bill for person 4, and so on. And then one person's going to get their bill for free.
Oh. So that sounds complicated, especially with regards to moving all that luggage.
Yes, there's a lot of baggage associated with that metaphor, isn't there?
There we go. From Nancy Abrams, are the correspondences you've discussed between intuitively different infinities true only of potential infinities, or is it also true of actual infinities?
Say that again.
Are the correspondences you've discussed between intuitively different infinities true only of potential infinities, since it requires that someone match the pairs one by one, or is it also true of actual infinities?
Right. So all of the examples with infinite sets are dealing with actual infinities. That's all. Cantor, that was his specialty, was the actual infinities.
A dear friend of mine, Steve White, put in more of a comment than a question, but the infinite creator within the tabernacle is equivalent to the real numbers fitting between 1 and 2. Just a thought from him. Another question is,
and by the way, should you do you want to put the Google Forms link in the chat window again in case it's gotten too buried?
That, everyone. And there it is. Would another example of the value of Torah's 613 commandments be the idea of a genuinely and intentionally but incomplete mitzvah be considered complete by God? Let me put that back into the chat.
And by the way, if everyone would just go ahead and click on the Google form, you can have it open on your screen. And that way, even when you close if you don't want to take the survey while you're listening to the Q&A, which I understand, that's great. At least click on the Google Forms link so that you'll have it ready to use as soon as you're ready to do it.
It'll be very helpful to us. Larry, I just re-entered the text of the question that Rochelle asked into the chat there. Would another example of the value of Torah's 613 commandments be the idea of a genuinely and intentionally but incomplete mitzvah?
Wow.
By God.
That's a beautiful question. You know, there's a lot of traditional Jewish scholarship about, you know, in some contexts, the intention is all that matters. And in other contexts, it's only whether you do the action that matters. So I'm going to defer that question to one of the rabbis on the call, either you or someone else, because that's above my pay grade.
Well, I love the way that this conversation adds to the idea of mitzvot and the idea of commandments, commandedness, and our obligation to fulfill them by talking about their worth and their value as an infinite, right? Because like you, I have also been curious about that idea, right? Where we have lists of commandments and, you know, such and such is equal to them all, right? Even in Reform liturgy, much less in traditional liturgy, every morning in the prayer service, we read, you know, so-and-so, such and such commandments, but the study of Torah, right, is equal to them all, or is, you know, equivalent to them all, or, you know, and it talks about how, you know, performing these mitzvot, like celebrating with bride and groom and accompanying the dead for burial, and all these like incredible communal activities that we might engage in with one another, you know, something about how like the benefit is retained in the world to come, but the payment is delved out in this world, right? There's this confusing conversation about what it means to fulfill these commandments that you cannot ever fully fulfill, right? There are always more people to visit. There are always more celebrations to make happier, and always more mourners to walk with. And so the idea that those things are in fact infinite, and in being infinite, we can actually make sense of the idea that studying Torah is equal to them all, because we never fulfill our obligation to study Torah either. Gives us a sense of how these things balance out and what it is the rabbis are even talking about or thinking about in the first place, right? They're not just being, hopefully, they're not just being silly. They're not just saying, oh yeah, the Torah is more important. Just sit and study in a room. Who cares about the things happening in life? No, we know that's not what they mean. So what do they mean? Well, we can only begin to really understand what they mean, or we can begin to understand what they mean when we think about it from this context of infinity. And I just love that connection. I think that's so important. It tells us so much about mitzvot, right? Or about how we're supposed to live life, and how we're supposed to fulfill all these competing obligations in life as we walk through life and strive to live meaningful lives, regardless of our religious tradition or identity.
Can I add a little bit? Can I jump in?
Please, Jeff, and let me add you, yes.
So it's fascinating in thinking about mitzvot in this kind of way. And I think, you know, there was a question that came up, I think from Jamie, of so I can fulfill the most important mitzvot and can ignore the rest. And then wonderful Jewish tradition of like, well, you're right and you're right. So there's all this wonderful text of everything being infinite. And yet there's also a recognition that in our world right now, there are trade-offs, right? There's costs and benefits. And there's even a line in the Mishnah where it says, consider the cost of a mitzvah against its benefit, and consider the benefit of a sin against its cost. And which is a very, very sort of cold calculation in this kind of way. So there is a piece, there's a recognition of like, you know what? If I steal, there may be some benefit for that, right? Like I will get a little bit more money. There is a benefit to this kind of way. What is the cost going to be? And so if it's infinity versus infinity, then the calculation sort of explodes. But when we're dealing with what they were dealing with in rabbinical times and in our times too, where right politics are dealing with questions where, you know, $1.9 trillion is a huge amount of money, but it's not infinite. And, you know, and we've been thinking about that on the year of on the anniversary of COVID of, you know, I live in New York and been to the Museum of Math, but, you know, one of the things that was happening in New York was trying to figure out who was going to get a ventilator and who was not going to get a ventilator, and, or different things of what people, you know, people had to put themselves at risk to be able to put food on their family. And we say, well, everyone's life is infinite. That's a wonderful thing. What actually happens when we've got to make these kinds of trade-offs? And that becomes much more complicated.
The text in its origin that I was referring to, it's you know, there are matters that a person enjoys the profits of in this world, and the principle exists for them or is held for them in the world to come. And this series of lists appears again and again too. So yeah, I think to Rochelle's question, that having a better understanding of these concepts, which many would think are antithetical to religious identity or religious tradition because they're scientific and, you know, logically based and rational and based on our examination of the world and the universe as it is, enhance and help us to understand our own religious traditions and what it is we're supposed to do. And they begin to help us understand or ask important questions about what to do with regards to real world problems like Rabbi Middleman is referring to. There was one more question I noticed. So to Jamie's question, no. So as he said, so if I fulfill the most important mitzvot, can I ignore the rest, right? I don't think that was, I love the question. But not the idea, right? But it is an important question to ask, which is if all of the mitzvot or all of the ways that we're supposed to practice are according to some equivalent, well, then how do you prioritize? And how do you find meaning? And I think that comes to the question that religion can begin to answer, right? Is how do you pick and choose? How do you identify what's most important? How do you prioritize? And that, for me at least, that's where religions begins to step in, right? Those religious values and religious identity. And to that question, we have to say, well, let's take some time and study about it. One more question. Is there and this, he admits it might be esoteric, is there a way to represent the infinite within the finite in geometric topology?
I haven't studied topology in a very long time. I took one class and didn't do that great in it. Maybe we have a topologist in the audience that wants to take that. But I do think that, I guess what comes to mind when I heard that question was like fractals. Because with a fractal, you can have an object that has a finite area and yet an infinite perimeter as you keep zooming in on its jagged boundary, and it gets jagged within the jagged, within the jagged, within the jagged, and the perimeter actually becomes infinite, even though it's still a finite area that it encloses. I don't know if that's what the person had in mind or if there's yet another angle on it that someone wants to share.
I can connect you if you have additional questions, especially those of you who are a little bit further along in your development of your mathematical minds. If you'd like a connection, I'm happy to serve as an introduction, and we're happy to do that. I want to again share the link to the survey that we're hoping you'll help us out with. So that we can continue to do these and to do them well, but also to help us understand who you are or what it is that brings you to these conversations. I'm going to share that in the chat room again and just ask that you fill that out. Any final thoughts or final words?
For me or from someone else?
From you, Dr. Lesser. We have so many people. I'm not just, I'm hesitant to just unmute everybody and let, I think we'll be here all evening. And I think we promised not to stay on until infinity, just till 8. So I don't want to do that, but do you have any final words? And then if anybody has any other additional final thoughts or questions, we're happy to forward them over or to facilitate ongoing conversations about that. I see one more question in the chat, and then I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lesser, for any final thoughts if you have any. Which is, I guess
I don't feel the need to add any more content, okay. but I do want to say just how appreciative I am for everyone for attending this, probably not knowing quite what they were in for, and hoping that I met or exceeded their expectations. I haven't been able to read all of the chat while I was talking, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a number of very special people in my path that came tonight, and that makes me feel very good. So thank you all for coming with me on this journey, and I can't wait to read the whole chat later to read everyone's comments.
And I want to, there are a lot of people here with us who are well, they're all very special, but I want to especially make note of Dr. Kim Jongarius, who will be with us April 25th. Please sign up for that. In June, Dr. Victor Katz will be joining us for a talk. Please be on the lookout and sign up for that. Dr. Vladek Krajinovic is with us this evening, and Olga Kosheleva, they'll be talking with us in coming months as well. So we have a lot of current and future celebrities in the mathematical world who are with us, who are going to be presenting to us as well. I'm very, very excited looking forward to those conversations. Just a little bit of thinking about the infinite and infinity in mathematical terms has helped me to think about the infinite and the divine. And I'm very much looking forward to how I will have the opportunity to learn and to reflect on my own religious thoughts and identity and experience from these additional conversations as well. I want to be sure we beat the clock here. Please, please, please take our survey, and thank you all for joining us. We're really grateful to you. We're grateful to Scientists in Synagogues and Sinai and Synapses and Rabbi Middleman. Thank you so much for being with us this evening as well, and for truly making this all possible. Dr. Larry Lesser, thank you so much for educating us and for helping us to think more deeply about our own religious identities and about the universe and the world. And thank you for being a thought partner with me as we put together this, this 6-series talk over the next 9 months. Grateful to all of you for joining us, and hopefully many more important and wonderful conversations to come. Grateful to you all for being with us this evening, and thank you.